Whenever something good happened in my life, I would buy a lottery ticket, solve the complex computer problem at work, purchased a ticket. I got my car repaired for less than I expected, purchased a ticket. I celebrated the birth of my grandniece, purchased a ticket as a Buddhist. I suppose it was my own unique way of playing with karma. It paid off. As the sole winner, I took home the Illinois Mega Millions jackpot. The 20-year payout came to $40 million. After taxes, I was left with $21 million spread over 2 decades. A tax-free $1,005,000 per year. Yes, I can make it work. At the time, my credit card debt was consuming me completely. So my first priority was to free my wallet from Citibank's grip. Then I upgraded my aging 14-year-old Jeep Wrangler. The soft top had zippers that were splitting due to age and shrinkage. I traded it in for a Range Rover Sport, which came with a sturdy frame hitch and trailer-like connection. I wanted a dependable utility vehicle that was better built than a Jeep. I never considered Hummers. Every time I saw one, I had an uncontrollable urge to grab a can of white spray paint and scrawl, "I am a bastard" on the side. Next, I purchased a large box trailer and loaded it with lidded storage containers. We are preparing to leave the Chicago area as soon as possible. It was early spring, nearly May. The grass was bright green. After finally recovering from the dull, muddy mess of winter, the notorious spring storms had not yet arrived, and I wanted to leave long before they did. I gave my notice at work because I was the only technician in the company. My boss was not thrilled. His panicked expression said it all. I handed him all of my passwords and contacts, patted his shoulder, and left him slowly rocking in the corner. For years, I had been managing 2 people's workloads, ever since my supervisor retired, in addition to fingerprinting duties. Now it was his turn to cope without me. However, it wasn't just the job or the weather that made me want to relocate. Growing up, my family drove across the United States and Canada, with a camping trailer in tow. I'd seen some amazing sights, but nothing captivated me more than the oceans. I remember sitting in awe at the Bay of Fundy, watching the tides. Despite the thick fog that reduced visibility to 20 feet, I could hear the waves crashing against the shore as I drove to my new home. My online research quickly determined that the West Coast was too crowded for my liking. The southern and southeastern shores were also out. I didn't want to face a hurricane. Boston. I had been there as a teenager. Excellent for shopping, but far too much of a city atmosphere for me. Eventually, I settled on the southern coast of Maine. Portland appeared to have a promising climate, similar to the Fox River Valley west of Chicago, but with the ocean acting as a natural heat regulator. Cape Elizabeth caught my attention. It was closer to the sea while remaining close to Portland for shopping and dining. I contacted a realtor and began making inquiries. Hurricane Irene had recently passed through the area, but I took a chance, assuming they wouldn't see another storm of that magnitude anytime soon. At the end of Zubkov Road, there is a newer ranch-style home, with 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. It had an open floor plan, an attached 2-car garage, and, best of all, the sea was visible from the back of the house. The property ended at the shore. Wasn't it a sandy beach? No, far from it. It was shelved. Metamorphic rock is guaranteed to rip the bottom out of any boulder. It was foolish to make an attempt at landing. There was a small flat rock beach and a scar, where a boat could enter or exit just to the north of the house. But the back approach directly behind the house was very rough and protected by a small island. Hurricane Irene had destroyed 2 of the neighbors' houses. The previous owners of the property I was interested in had purchased those properties. The owners of the remaining house had died in a car accident several months earlier, while returning from a post-Christmas trip to Boston, approximately 120 miles down the coast. The asking price for the house and its 4 acres was $645,000. I arranged for a 5-year loan that would not penalize me for early repayment, then countered with $600. A $100,000 down payment per month, and over $70,000 in fees and insurance. Later, I acquired the title to a house. I went through my belongings looking for anything worth keeping. I intend to furnish the house in mission-style oak, regardless of how the interior looks. My current furniture is drab. That was generous. The kitchen goods were packed along with all of the tools, my clothes, computer equipment, and books. Camping gear and collapsible camp or campaign furniture were brought along, as well as my bedding, towels, vacuum cleaners, and cleaning supplies. I had a large, heavy 2-drawer oak filing cabinet that seriously endangered me getting into the trailer. The final items I packed were a radio, several small desk lamps, and a few fans. Everything else was removed by a moving company. I hired merry maids to clean up the place while I went to an Army surplus store to get a cot, a sleeping pad, and some olive drab, UF Army wool blankets. I was too old to enjoy sleeping on the floor. I discovered a French medical letter that I could prop up on a few storage crates. It'd be fine as a cot. I spent my first night in Carmel, Indiana, just north of Indianapolis. It had been a long day of travel. My low back ached. My right hip was frozen, and my right knee was making me miserable. I checked into a hotel with a spa. I took some Advil and spent an hour in the jacuzzi before considering dinner. The rest of the trip would be divided into smaller sections, with rest and some walking in between. I was over 50. I was no longer capable of doing what I did when I was 30. After an early breakfast, I drove through Cincinnati and then to Cleveland, Ohio. I made my final stop of the day there. I had dinner at Ruby Tuesdays, a chain restaurant that serves decent food. The next evening, I found myself in Rochester, New York, where I dined at a Golden Corral known for its extensive salad bar and better-than-average steaks. On the fourth day, I stopped in Springfield, Massachusetts, the original home of the near-legendary Springfield Armory in the United States. In Europe, the Springfield name rivals Skoda Arms. It was a nice, easy 300-mile day that got me to Portland in time to find the realtor's office before the closing, where I picked up the keys and a stack of documents that they'd been holding for me. I felt strange holding that key in my hand. It was the first home I had ever owned. I forced myself to wait until the morning to find the location. I spent the night in a run-of-the-mill motel, ate a delicious locally caught fish dinner, and went to bed. It took a long time to fall asleep because my expectations, both good and bad, kept me awake. When I awoke the next morning, I had a light breakfast before exploring the local furniture stores. None of them had what I was looking for on display, but one did have good photographic illustrations of what their vendors stocked. I purchased and paid for a kitchen set, with an old-style farm kitchen and work table, a living room set with a well-padded couch, and an overstuffed chair and an ottoman, 2 bedroom sets with queen-sized beds to match my bedding, and 2 broad library tables with captain's chairs, all of which were to be delivered and assembled within 1 week. I then purchased a cell phone and service plan from a local vendor, and called the utility companies to confirm that the services were activated in my name. My next step was to determine which cable TV internet provider served my home and turn it on. I prepaid to have my LP gas bulk tank filled, then purchased a 2-wire DSL modem and scheduled its activation. The last thing I did in town was purchase a half-dozen steaks, sandwich fixings, a case of beer, a large sturdy cooler, and ice. I went home. I would never have found the location without my GPS. I would not say it was in Satan's armpit, but the last road left something to be desired. When I finally arrived at the house, I was satisfied, vindicated. It appeared huge from the front. The property was partially covered in trees and brush, but most of the undergrowth had been cleared. That would change. I wanted it to be overgrown and full of animals. When I could afford it, I'd hire an arborist to help me. There was a large loop driveway with several trees in it. I opened the door and sniffed, keeping the house hidden from view until the very end. Good. I didn't find any mildew or mold. The wooden floors echoed as I walked through the rooms. The house had been emptied and professionally cleaned several months before it went on the market. It was built on a slab that was secured to a rock jetty. I inspected the electrical service panel in the utility room and turned off the breakers. Several lights turned on throughout the house. I was pleased to see a washer and dryer already installed next to the service panel. The water heater, kitchen stove, clothes dryer, and furnace were all gas-powered. I activated the pilot lights. Behind the house, there was a 1,000-pound LPG gas tank painted white. I hoped there was enough fuel to last until the supply truck arrived. A large sliding glass door provided the kitchen with a back walkout. It was quite difficult to open. I nearly ripped the handle off of it. I assumed that the salt spray had gotten to the rollers. I planned to replace that with thermopane French doors first thing. A small patio would be built as well. Some sparse weeds covered the thin layer of dirt that led down to the shoreline. I shook my head at the unkempt state of the backyard landscaping. A few bags of pine bark chunks would be sufficient to cover areas near the house, but they would need to be reapplied each year. Every year, I expected the winter storm wash to completely destroy everything. Perhaps a row of landscaping timbers could hold them in place. I'd go for it. The kitchen required some work. The stove was surprisingly inexpensive and barely serviceable. The small refrigerator had been propped open to prevent it from becoming musty, and cool air was pumping out. I closed the refrigerator doors and looked around for ice cube trays. Nope. No luck. I realized I should get out a pad of paper and a pen to leave on the counter for a while. I'd be writing shopping lists until the cows arrived home. It was clear that whoever designed that kitchen wasn't a cook. There was little counter space, and it was darker than I preferred. I realized I could easily persuade myself to order a nice large food preparation island with electrical service, lighting shelves above, and slide-out storage below. Those are ideal for larger appliances like a food processor, mixer, and slow cooker. I might even pay for a turkey oven. First and foremost, I needed to pour water and, once purchased, mineral oil into all of the floor drains. Flush the toilets. Run water through all of the sinks and into the bathtub. Shower. All black water traps needed to be filled, or sewer gas would back up into the house. When I opened the windows to let the air out, I stood still and listened. There it was. I heard the sea from the back of my own house. Wonderful. You couldn't remove my smile with a belt sander. After I had developed my taste, I decided that my next step would be to empty the trailer. First, the paper towels and a spray bottle of 409 were removed from storage, along with the rest of the cleaning supplies, and placed in a garbage can. I cleaned the linen closet shelves and all of the kitchen shelves. I tend to keep my cleaning supplies in dishpans. They entered and went directly under the kitchen sink. Towels and bedding began to fill the linen closet. I chose a bedroom with an attached bathroom and set up in it soap, a towel, toilet paper, and all the standard bathroom supplies. Things returned to their proper places. Next, I set up the litter for my bed, covering it with a camping pad and then a sheet. Since the evenings were cool, I dug out a storage container full of blankets and took one out. I placed the container beside the cot to use as a bedside stand. A lamp and a radio were placed atop it. No clocks. Screw it. My cell phone has a clock display. I discovered the house DSL connection in the living room. I set up my computer and TV monitor on a folding table and plugged in the DSL modem so it could connect to Mama and get comfortable. I connected my flat panel monitor's TV tuner to the F connector on the wall and turned it on. Very good. I had a few stations, including a digital rebroadcast of what appeared to be local channels. Very good. PBS is where I get my cooking shows. Most traditional cable TV connections use an F connector and a central wire with a screw-down collar. After my rest, I began to stock the kitchen. Then I discovered the boxes of books. Rats. I'd forgotten to buy bookshelves. The paperwork came out. I set up my other folding camp table in the kitchen eating area and sat in my cheesy Target folding chair. I had a good phone signal, so I called the furniture store. I ordered a 6-foot-tall blonde oak bookcase with adjustable shelves to be delivered and installed as soon as possible. My credit card number guaranteed next-day delivery. The refrigerator was already cold, so I transferred the contents of the ice chest into it. I drained the meltwater from the bag ice and put the remaining cubes in the freezer. By then, the kitchen was littered with empty storage containers. It was time to explore the garage. An obvious door led from the kitchen to the garage. It was spacious. It had a painted plywood wall inside instead of bare studs, and a large gas-powered forced air heater hung in the upper back corner. I assumed the garage was insulated based on these signs. I'd remove a wall panel later to check, but given the weather, I was fairly confident. The back wall featured a large, sturdy workbench next to a door leading out the back of the house. Now I had a place to store my tools. I added pegboard hangers, and paint to my shopping list. I needed some 1x1/2 furring strips to go between the pegboard and the wall, to prevent the hangers from scoring the wall. Because the pegboard is made of fiberboard with holes punched in it, it must be painted. When used frequently, it tends to self-destruct quickly. By that point, I was exhausted. I fried up a New York strip steak and had it with a beer. I used a flashlight to get my pillow out of the trailer. I took my first shower in my home and went to bed. Damn that. I didn't wake up on time. Every time I awoke at night, I checked the time. I'd have to buy one because I left my old one behind. This one is on the shopping list, along with a Weber grill, 60 pounds of charcoal, and lighter fluid. I continued to unpack the trailer. My clothes gradually ended up hanging in the bedroom closet. The firearms and ammunition were stored in the linen closet, along with the vacuum cleaners and extra toilet paper. When I got to the camping gear, I carefully unwrapped my oil lamp and placed it on the kitchen counter. I made sure the drawer under the kitchen counter contained a couple of long fireplace lighters and a heavy flashlight. If I lost power and it was cold outside, I could stay warm in the kitchen by starting the stove with a manual igniter. Everything was finally unpacked. My back as I stretch out my tight lower spine and hips. I asked myself, why not get a hot tub? I slowly grinned. One of those bedrooms was getting waterproofed, tiled, and plumbed for a Japanese tub. I've added it to the list. All of the walls and floors would need to be removed and replaced with a waterproof green board. The material is used to line bathrooms and modern structures. It would also require better ventilation for the guys. Arrived in a box truck with the pieces for 8 large bookshelves. I instructed the guys to cover one entire wall in the living room with them, as well as tie the frames together and anchor them to the wall. In a matter of hours, they were finished. I tipped them $20 each, and they smiled as they left. I dug out my electric drill bits and used drywall screws to secure the center shelves of all the units on both sides. This ensures that the vertical members do not bow out under load. After taking 4 Advils, I spent the rest of the day organizing and shelving my books. I went into town to find a specific contractor. I had a few job opportunities lined up. I looked up the company that built the home. They were still in business and willing to do a few renovations. We discussed 2 options: converting the tar paper roof to slate and replacing the sliding glass doors with heavy French-style insulated glass doors. 3. Transforming a bedroom into a spa room. 4. Building a small deck. 5. Installing a fireplace with a swinging crane so I could grill and cook. 6. Stripping and resealing all 7 wood floors. Create a large kitchen island with power outlets, lighting, and heavy-duty drawer glides. I realized that I'd have to postpone some of these changes, particularly the fireplace and the roof, until the following year to avoid depleting my working capital. But getting the planning done seemed prudent. When we started discussing costs, I was pleasantly surprised. Aside from the fireplace and roofing jobs, I could have everything done for around $17. Oh. We agreed on starting the renovations the day after the next Friday. I suggested that he start with the floor ceiling, as the furniture was about to be delivered and installed. I was to leave the sliding glass doors unlocked and disappear for a week. I paid him up front and left for home. I spent the next day creating lists. I really wanted to stock the kitchen. It also bothered me that I didn't have enough freezer space. I added a chest freezer to my list. I'm not sure where to put it. I concluded that the garage was the only reasonable location. I could afford to put a large freezer on the outside wall. I was tired of eating fried steaks. I coveted a charcoal grill. I can't help but be a die-hard carnivore who enjoys having my meat licked by fire. It's how I was trained. I called the contractor and added a small project. I wanted to build a closet with heavy shelves between the garage and the kitchen to house a canned goods pantry. We agreed on a price. Later in the summer, I'd call him to install clip lines for a canvas wall. There was no rush. I envisioned lines of recessed eyes, concealed by hinged brass strip covers. We'd see if he could create a design that matched my concept. I spent the next week at a hotel. I parked the trailer in their lot and went shopping. Because of their sizes, I used the trailer to pick up a barbecue grill, some patio furniture, and a chest freezer. For the remainder of my shopping, I focused on canned goods and small appliances. For $1,200, I purchased a good home model Wolf gas range with a very nice oven. The home models have double walls and will not burn down the house. They also do not require a 2-inch gas supply pipe, as commercial models do. I also bought a slide-in electric oven with a broiler to install in the kitchen wall. They would be delivered and installed once I returned home. I later checked to see if the stove required a fume hood above it. At the same time, I purchased a Sub-Zero reach-in refrigerator to replace the old kitchen refrigerator. Bookstores, restaurants, live music museums. I had a great time that week. I learned that Portland had at least 5 universities, which drove a hardcore nightlife. I also discovered that Rock Lobster is thriving in Portland, Maine. My 100-pound weight loss goal was jeopardized that week. I bought almost my entire weight in books. I'm a jumbo guy. That's a lot of books, along with a few movies. The town was relatively small in comparison to Chicago suburbs, such as Hinsdale or Naperville, but it was Maine's largest city. It was condensed and offered all of the services that one could reasonably require or want. If I found something that wasn't available locally, Boston was a day's drive away, and the internet offered shipping. I figured that now that I had my own place, I'd do the newly rich American thing and invest in a surround sound home theater. I hired a local company to do it upright. Holy crap. I had no idea flat panel displays came in such large sizes. I shut them down at 72 inches. It was mounted in front of the sofa. The guy who did all the wiring was a genius. High-definition audio has come a long way since Dolby. Wow. I then decided to pick up a few audio-enabled movies to test the system. My furniture was everything I hoped it would be. It was both comfortable and beautiful. I fell asleep on the couch and awoke without any pain. That's a metric you can believe in and be comfortable with. I set up the grill on my brand new back porch, along with the Adirondack chair and patio table I purchased. I backed the trailer into the garage, slid the chest freezer out, dragged it to the desired location, and plugged it in. Wonderful. I had a space to store half a cow but nothing to put in it, so the canned goods went into my new pantry. Then I put the cooler back in the car and parked the trailer next to the garage. The hand truck moved the new fridge in, and the old one out. I wanted to find a local butcher. I didn't have a phone book, so I used the internet. Perfect. Pat's Meat Market was right up 77, and slightly to the left on Stevens Avenue at the north end of town. I purchased a cooler full of wrapped steaks, chicken breasts, and strip pork loins on ice. Then placed an order for a half carcass of prime-grade dry-aged beef cut into steaks, roasts, ribs, stew, beef tenderloin, roasts and burgers. I also ordered 20 pounds of thickly sliced center-cut pork chops, and 10 pounds of double-smoked bacon cut into quarter-inch thick slices. I had a small order of marrow, bones, veal liver, and kidneys ready for baked marrow dishes, as well as steak and kidney pies. On my way home, I stopped at the furniture store. I asked where I should go to buy a hot tub. One of the guys there had an idea and gave me directions. A half hour later, I was negotiating for a home installation. I'd have to learn how to use the chemicals to keep the water sweet and prevent anything from growing in it. I was aware that many municipal water supply installations used ultraviolet light to sterilize their water. Before signing any paperwork, I double-checked that the hot tub was UV tolerant. My contractor was about to get another small job installing a couple of waterproof halide lamps. I had dinner in town, confident that my meat would remain on ice in the cooler because it had been chilled to well below zero. I made sure to arrive home before dark. I was still uncomfortable on the local roads. I spent the evening going through my new book purchases, inspecting, ordering, and organizing them. As I sat on my sofa, I looked at the wall where I wanted to place the fireplace. I considered the history of the fireplace in the home and how stoves evolved. I chose a cheaper, more efficient solution that still allowed me to watch a fire from the comfort of my living room. Rather than having a mason build a fireplace, I chose to have a Franklin wood stove installed. The cost savings would be substantial, and my home insurance would be significantly reduced. I purchased 8 large bags of pine bark chunks from a local hardware store and placed them around the patio's perimeter. It only costs about $6 per 20-pound bag. The landscaping timbers were slightly more expensive, but they would not blow away during winter storms off the coast. I hadn't been paying as close attention to my bank accounts as I should have. I used the computer to check my master balance and discovered that I still had over $300 on account. By that point, I had covered the majority of my startup expenses. I had to buy firewood and the Franklin stove, arrange for snow removal, and pay recurring expenses like property tax, car and house insurance, electric bills, water and sewer bills, trash removal fees, food expenses, and the home lawn. The last item was not due until after my next lottery payment arrived. I didn't have much to worry about other than keeping myself busy during the fall and winter. If it came down to it, I could enroll in some continuing adult education classes at the local universities. Meanwhile, I planned to learn how to bake like a pro and brush up on my knowledge of Perl and C programming languages. I had not explored Cape Elizabeth at all. The following day, the spa company arrived to install my hot tub and the accompanying redwood surround. I received a pamphlet on how to care for it, as well as a sample kit of the chemicals involved. Instead of emptying the thing down the drain, I was told that it would take the better part of the day to reach temperature. Changing the water puts a strain on the local sewage system. I purchased a small sump pump and hung a string out the window because I was concerned about slipping and falling while looking at that tub and surround. My eyes widened. I didn't have health insurance. Blue Cross refused to work with me after I quit my job. I immediately went online to find a health insurance broker and make arrangements to pick up a policy. The terms required that I contact a local practitioner and schedule an appointment for a general health survey. I shrugged and considered playing Dr. Bingo, but then remembered hearing about a physician referral service back in Chicago. I took advantage of a service offered by my local hospital. Dr. Chambers and I discussed my weight loss plans, and he agreed with the majority of what I was doing. He suggested daily walks, which I agreed to. Now I had to make a path around the property to walk on. I chose the easy way out. I hired a contractor to install an 8-foot fence along the property line. He had to clear out the trees and brush to get his truck in, so I was prepared for a little more. He promised to install a wood chip track inside the fence. He took about a month to finish it. My next form of insurance was a burglar alarm. A 4-footed burglar alarm. I first tried the local Humane Society shelter but had little success. Then I asked around at a few local veterinarians. I was looking for an Alaskan Malamute or a Shepherd Akita. Large, intelligent dogs that would thrive in the climate. A family with a newborn appeared to be concerned about their 2-year-old Akita. They lived in town, in a house with a small yard. I offered to buy the dog for $200 see if I could become friends with it. That weekend, the doctor arranged for me to receive an invitation. I had supper with the family and was introduced to Toby. He liked me enough. So Mr. Astor handed me Toby's leash, and I signed over a $250 check. They handed me his dishes and an open bag of dog food. When I opened the car door for him at home and removed his leash, he bolted. Toby came back a happy dog. I placed his dishes on the back deck and refilled them with food and water. I hired my friendly neighborhood contractor to install a large insulated window in the garage, as well as 2 large doggy doors, one for the back garage door and one for the door leading from the garage to the kitchen. I'd have to teach him how to use it, but I was confident he was intelligent. He'd pick it up just fine. Toby needed somewhere to sleep. I cut 2 army wool blankets into 2-inch strips and braided them into a nice, thick rug. I finished it with a button and carpet thread. It ended up being about an inch thick because I double-folded the strips while braiding them. I consulted with the doctor to determine what dog food I should be feeding him and stocked up. I got some of the wet stuff in cans for a weekly treat and wasn't afraid to feed him table scraps. The fat would keep his coat shiny, and the exercise from running around the property would keep him from becoming bulky. Speaking of fat, I had lost 22 pounds. That was a good start. My goal weight was 190 pounds or less, and I started out at slightly more than 300. I still had a ways to go before I could install the Franklin stove and halide lamps. Toby loved the doggy doors because they allowed him to go outside for a run or a pee whenever he wanted. The fence was finished before July arrived. Toby and I walked. Then, as my fitness improved, I jogged around the fence line. I legally posted signs warning people not to hunt or trespass on the property. I purchased 2 brutal-looking 12-gauge pump shotguns and had a gunsmith aim lasers at both of them. I purchased buckshot and slug shells for them. They had black plastic grips and were Parkerized. One went by the front door, one by the back. My .357 was stored in my bedside stand, along with 4 full-speed loaders. I created an action item to determine a range for monthly target practice. I also checked the shotgun's lasers on a monthly basis to see if the batteries needed to be replaced. The laser units I purchased required large 123 AA batteries because they last much longer than wafer batteries, and 123 days can be obtained for about $1 each when purchased in bulk. I was getting pretty good at baking bread with my KitchenAid mixer and a small scale. I mastered making pound cake and pizza dough. I purchased a stone for the electric oven, a long-handled flat-bladed tool for getting pizzas in and out of the oven, and experimented with pizza sauce. I pretty much followed a recipe from a North Chicago pizza joint, including the garlic sausage they used. I used to work for First Star Bank before they were acquired. It was located near Andersonville, just north of the Loop. We had a branch there. Across the street was a bar restaurant that served the best pizza I had ever had, bar none. The most recent location map for U.S. banks near that is 1953 North Clybourne Avenue. That cannot be it. I remember it being near Devon on Clark. I also remembered there was a fantastic bakery right next to the bank, to the north. When Toby began grumbling and talking under his breath, I was glad I had read up on Akitas. I simply dug into his fur and massaged him. He groaned before settling down. The next time I went into town, I purchased a few dumbbell dog toys, heavy rubber, and several sets of dumbbells to exercise with. I wanted to swing them around while jogging. One day, Toby mouthed one of my weighted dumbbells and looked at me surprised. He then threw it into the air and caught it before trotting away with his new toy, tail waving in the air. I never saw that dumbbell again, and several replacements went missing as well. I bought a couple of 12-pounders and left them out. One of them vanished. I've stopped losing dumbbells. That's when I replaced the missing 12-pounder. I was overjoyed to have discovered a butcher who made beef jerky, as it is one of my weaknesses. I also adore Hunter sausages. They're smoked and dried into small brown sticks, similar to Slim Jim's, but with less fat and a good, hot, garlicky Italian sausage. Pat's Meat Market prepared mine to order. They had also prepared smoked jerk beef for me. It is not as thoroughly dried as jerky, but the smoking process preserves the sweetness for a long time. When Toby smelled it on me, he jumped up and down on all fours like crazy. I didn't have the heart to disappoint him. It was a special treat for the both of us. I spent many afternoons lounging on the back patio, basking in the sun, and listening to the surf. Toby grumbled in his sleep and enjoyed spending afternoons with me. I discovered that he preferred his beef medium rare, with a touch of salt. I printed out an advertisement for weekly domestic help and posted it at all of Portland's universities, as well as Cape Elizabeth's largest coffee shop. I offered $100 for 2 to 3 hours per week of cleaning the place. I noticed that they must enjoy dogs. I received several hits, but the majority were worthless. Finally, I found a young lady from Husson University who needed money. Kate Ainsworth was a cute blonde who needed money for next semester's textbooks. She was an intense little thing who dove right into cleaning when Toby poked his nose in. She adored him to the point where his tail nearly smashed into the floor. I offered to make dinner for her. She was hesitant until Toby leaned into her sideways, nearly knocking her to the ground. We ate pizza and beer. While discussing her schoolwork, I discovered that she was unsure what to do for her independent study project. I was determined to teach her Perl. It was a very useful computer language that most academics were completely unfamiliar with. The fact that I had over a dozen language books didn't hurt either. I loaned her one of the 2 Camel books I owned on the subject, the Master Book, co-written by the language author Larry Wall, and the Coriolis Perl Black Book. I scheduled us for 3 hours of tutoring per week. I used the Campbell book to create a syllabus path from here to there, outlining how to present subjects and concepts in a class so that they build on one another. I spent the first 2 weeks drawing similarities to other languages, followed by differences. Following that, I ventured into web database design, utilizing Perl modules to interface with MySQL. I discussed credit card processing and distributed, or web-based processing models. I was prepared to take a step or two back if she didn't understand, but it wasn't required. She stayed right up. By the end of the semester, I had an indecently clean house, and she had received an A in independent study. I was surprised at how quickly Perl returned to me. I went to Husson University and proposed that they recommend a filter class for first-year graduate students in Perl. If they took the class, they would have had little chance in the upper-level classes. Even though the majority of the teaching staff knew nothing about Perl or Algol 66, I received a surprisingly positive reception. When I returned home one day in the fall, I planned to teach. Poor Toby was mumbling and licking himself. The poor guy was in his mid-teens and dog years and horny as hell. I resolved to do something about it. I advertised for a 2-year-old female Akita. About $1,200 later, I drove to Bangor to pick up Amy. I could tell she was nervous, even though she accepted me. I believe it was the smell of Toby on everything. When I arrived at the driveway and opened the door, Toby was sitting there, sweeping the ground with his tail. A photo of a furry gentleman. Amy jumped down, and after a while, they touched noses. Then they headed into the woods. I exhaled. True love. I ordered 2 more army wool blankets to create another sleeping rug. More burgers and more dog food. The weather was becoming colder. I started wearing a barn coat outside when I was sitting on the patio, soaking up the sun. Toby and Amy usually sat in the sun alongside me. I purchased 6 face cords of hardwood and a chimney. A chimney is a Mexican pottery fireplace that stands approximately 3 feet tall. Once the pottery is heated up from the fire within, it makes an excellent patio heater. The firewood was stacked inside the far garage wall, allowing enough room to access the freezer. I realized that if the power went out, I could withstand almost anything except a lack of water. I purchased 25-gallon plastic jerry cans and boiled them. Then I filled them with sweet water and added silver nitrate to keep the contents potable. They were later stored in the garage. If 100 gallons weren't enough, I'd purchase a water buffalo and fill it in town. I also purchased a propane generator to power the chest freezer. Every morning and evening, I ran the fence alongside the pops. I always carried a pistol and a few loaders in case I became a target. I didn't expect trouble, but being alone because I wasn't prepared when my weapons were available seemed ridiculous. On the first frosty evening, I lit a fire in the Franklin. The pups sat down and watched it doze in the heat. I did the same from a little further away, stretched out on the couch. The warmth and aroma of the burning firewood were truly special to me. It reminded me of the years I spent attending various rendezvous throughout Wisconsin. Every day, around midday, I spent some time sitting on the patio, listening to the sea. When the wind picked up and whipped the waves, I lit my chimney and huddled next to it for warmth. But I continued to sit and listen to the breakers. My heart and soul were comforted. Throughout the fall, I continued to push myself along the path that surrounded my property line. I didn't run or jog. It fell somewhere between the two. I continued to lose weight. I was down 43 pounds. I advertised for a complete set of Encyclopedia Britannica in 1976. I wanted to buy a set that was released before they separated the macro and micro PDAs. The split made no sense to me, and I couldn't find anything in it after the change. It cost me $200 for the set and $600 for shipping. Screw it. I received my encyclopedia. I learned how to make delicious raised cinnamon rolls with orange-flavored frosting, cheese, Danish, and cherry Danish. My diet was in jeopardy. Before purchasing the America's Test Kitchen cookbooks, I spent a long time learning how to make the best apple pie ever. Their recipe for pumpkin cheesecake should have been made illegal. I tested the recipe several times until I had it perfected. The holidays were approaching, so I invited another single teacher to my house for a Thanksgiving celebration. After several failed attempts, I eventually persuaded Mary Kate Easterling to accept my invitation. I cooked a small turkey and spread it over a bread cube, with mushroom and celery dressing. I served deviled eggs with butter and cream, mashed potatoes, cranberry compote, and candied acorn squash, followed by pumpkin cheesecake. We sat on the couch and watched Iron Man 1 and 2 accompanied by Pops. Amy fell asleep with her head on Mary's lap. I put her up in a guest bedroom and served her fresh cinnamon rolls for breakfast, along with hot coffee. I did not hear back from her after that. I guess she assumed I was going for the full court press and backed off. Sigh. I didn't want to use any dating services. I wanted to meet and speak with a potential friend or partner before allowing them through the front door. I spent more time on the back porch, watching the waves and wondering what I'd done wrong. Just as the snow began to fall, I filled the LP gas tank and signed up for snow plowing service. I purchased a snow shovel to keep the patio clear, as well as a snowmobile suit, so that I could sit on the patio in some comfort despite the weather while watching and hearing the breakers crash against the rocks. Cold comfort, indeed. I had visions of becoming a recluse, and they left a bad taste in my mouth. I didn't want to become the male equivalent of a cat lady. Most towns seemed to have a bakery of some kind, and Port Elizabeth was no exception. Their coffee wasn't particularly impressive, but their pastries were flaky and light. I started coming in for a mid-morning break on Saturdays. It allowed me to listen to other people talk and read the newspaper while ruining my diet. It wasn't too bad. A couple of cheese or cherry danishes, or a cinnamon roll once a week would not cost much. I wanted a small Christmas tree. That year, I purchased a 3-foot blue spruce in a pot, and a string of miniature clear lights. I set it up on my stove camping table in front of my living room's picture window. I had to remind myself to water and spray it every day to keep the needles from falling out. I thought it looked pretty nice with the house lights turned down low and a fire in the stove. I purchased a turning wheel humidifier to maintain a consistent moisture level throughout the home. After the Christmas season was over, I thoroughly soaked the little tree's root ball and stored it in the garage. I intended to plant it in the spring. I reduced the temperature in the garage to near freezing. I did not want my jerry cans of water to explode. The temperature never dropped below zero that winter, but there were many single-degree days and nights. Every day, I trudged around the path through the snow that had fallen the night before. When it was windy, I wore my snowsuit, gloves, and a nightcap, but the zipper remained open to my waist. Most days, I'd finished my exercise. By spring, I had lost 67 pounds and weighed slightly less than 240. I included sit-ups and push-ups in my workouts. I spent some time in the hot tub after each exercise session to avoid cramping. I was getting up at 6 a.m. every day to exercise in order to make my 10 a.m. class. The doctor warned me to slow down my weight loss, because I was likely to break a bone. I looked at him and sighed. "Doc, I am not happy to weigh 235 pounds. Just stay where you are until the middle of spring. It will be too muddy to walk on until then. Anyway, can I continue doing sit-ups and push-ups?" "Sure. But no jumping jacks, or you'll be in late casts." "Okay, boss." "Okay." I started taking calcium supplements in addition to my vitamins and changed my carnivore diet to include potatoes and vegetables. I added squats to my workout. I knew that as soon as the ground thawed, the dogs would be covered in mud from head to foot. So I asked my friendly contractor to install a temperature-controlled water hose tap in the garage, so I could run a hose out back and clean them up with warm water before they came inside. I also purchased a professional-grade mop and bucket, because they would make a mess once they entered the house. I called a cleaning service to have someone come in and do the floors once a week, as a preventative measure. I also made sure to get a couple of curry combs, because once the warm weather arrived, they'd begin shedding like crazy. I purchased 8 more sacks of pine bark to spread along the patio border after the spring storm subsided. The snow was gone, and all that remained was slush and slop. The dogs didn't want to go outside in it, but they did appreciate the warm water rinse when they got back inside. However, it left the place smelling like a wet dog, while giving them a warm bath. I noticed Amy was becoming a little rounder than she had been. Whoops. It's time for a trip to the vet. Yes, Amy had a bun in the oven. Several small buns. In fact, I gave Toby the letter I. Maybe it was time to get Toby's tubes clipped. He'd still get his thrills. He'd only fire blanks. The doctor described it as a simple outpatient procedure. The doctor completed the job, but he was no longer Toby's friend. I got some prenatal doggy vitamin drops for Amy's food, and was told she was about 3 weeks away from having her litter. On my way home, I picked up some 2x4 lumber, half sheets of plywood, carpeting, and a couple of inexpensive blankets. I was going to relegate the dogs to the garage from now on. I did not want puppy shit all over my house. I wasn't completely heartless, however. Of course, I turned up the garage heat to 60 degrees Fahrenheit and let them get used to their new open kennel before screwing the inside doggy door closed. Phew. Even I thought the carpet chunk smelled. I put them outside on the patio and purchased 2 bales of sweet hay to spread out for them. I hope you understand how much trouble 6 puppies can cause. The world is God's outhouse. After a few months, they attempted to follow Toby and me along the fence line. By 6 months, they were outpacing us. I looked at Toby and said, "It's entirely your fault." He sighed and grumbled. It was finally time for the grass to sprout. I was tired of having cold feet on wooden floors. I bought a few braided rugs to warm up the place. After my lottery check arrived, they were such a great find that I purchased several inexpensive Persian wool rugs as well. I didn't like how one of the cleaning women looked over my place. I called the cleaning company and informed them that I never wanted her on my property again. 2 weekends later, as I was leaving the bakery, she yelled at me, claiming that I would have gotten her fired if you hadn't pretended to be looking for a burglar. I'd have let it go. But you were checking the window latches and the kitchen door latch. I will say it again. I don't want to see you on my property again. I pushed past her and headed home. The next day, a dark blue Crown Victoria pulled up, and a large man stepped out. I assumed I'd finally drawn the number to receive a visit from the local sheriff. I opened the door and was about to greet him, when his size 12 came through the screen and nailed me in the thigh. I fell back, and he followed me inside, closing the door behind him. Sherry said, "You have too much money and too little sense. Besides, you got her fired. Let's see if you can remember where you keep your money." He grabbed my shirt front and stuffed a fist into my breadbasket before dropping me to the floor, where I struggled to breathe. I heard a crash in the kitchen. Then 2 furry black and white streaks struck him, one in the crotch and the other in the throat. By the time I regained my composure, he was down and bleeding profusely. I used my cell phone to call 911. I let the dogs chew on him while I grabbed the shotgun next to the door and wrapped it around. Another Crown Vic pulled up, and the door swung open. I pointed the shotgun at him and said, "Down now," and he dropped like a good combat vet hearing incoming. I called 911 and asked what the sheriff's license plate was. They took a while to respond, but they did so correctly. I asked what the sheriff looked like and received another correct answer. "All right. Your 911 operators say you're the sheriff, so I won't shoot you just yet." I pointed to the man writhing on the floor and said, "Trespassing, breaking, and entering. Home invasion. Assault and battery. An attempted robbery. He better be impersonating an officer, or I'll shoot both of you dead." The sheriff's eyes flashed at me, and the shotgun remained pointed at his belly button. He scowled as he looked down at the guy on the floor. He worked as a security guard at the mall in Portland. He was fired for attempting to get into the pants of some young people. I nodded and stepped back, raising my shotgun to port arms. "If you have a backhoe, you can make your own decision. I have plenty of woods, and he is no longer a problem." His sister or girlfriend was inspecting the property while working for a cleaning company, so I kicked her out. "Now this." He called her Sherry. He spit it out. "Damn, I'm very tempted. He will be out in 2 months. The way they move them in and out of here. I have an idea." I went to the kitchen, grabbed a fillet knife, and sharpened it with my steel. "We are going to pull his teeth. You haven't seen anything. Got it?" I ringed his thumbs just under the knuckle, watching the tendons curl up into small balls at the lower joint. Then I cut at the back of the retracted tendons and tore them out with needle nose pliers. There. There is no way a doctor can fix that. His thumbs are useless. Then, while he screamed and thrashed, I cut deep into the bone at the front of each of his shoulder joints. Now he can't hurt anyone. Put him in prison for a year, and he'll be somebody's pretty boy. No more problems. If you can't get him 5 years for impersonating an officer, something is wrong. He gave me a funny look. "Have you ever been in a team?" I shook my head slowly. "Don't go there." He laughed and called for an ambulance to haul away the trash. I gave both my doggies some kipper beef treats and a good scratching. Good doggies. Really good doggies. I found by the evidence that Toby crashed right through that locked dog door with his shoulder, bounced off the wall, dug his rear claws into the cabinet, and jumped from the kitchen to the entryway. Amy did the same. Good doggies. Sally disappeared. It took me more than a month to stop wanting to buy a backhoe. I gazed out at the ocean. Then I reconsidered. Netting and weights were improved. The bodies would flow with the current and be unconnected to the property. How silly of me. I began dreaming about the bad old days. I caught some flashes here and there, Then I woke up. Still silent, evaluating. I'm breathing quietly. Afterward, I take a deep breath and exhale. I'd eventually relax and fall back asleep. He wouldn't have thrown a punch if I'd been wearing my service stiletto. Of course, I would have needed to sand the blood out of the wood. I shrugged. What a small price. I went shopping for customized titanium blades. I purchased a speed bag, a heavy bag, and a pair of gloves. I got my glide back. I smiled when I remembered one of the training cards. The guy resembled Joe. Nobody except him could airborne shuffle anyone into an early grave. I remembered that he needed to glide. I stopped running on the trail and began running in the woods. We had a lot to memorize, practice, and train. All of this was gradually coming back. My blades came in. They measured 10 inches long, including the handles, with 2 for the inner arms and 2 for the outer arms. The outer blades served as guards, while the inner blades remained available. They were quite flat and sharp, with handles made of twisted paracord. I returned to the bakery for my Saturday treat. I read my newspaper and listened to the people. An older gentleman sat down at my table. I heard you were surprised by one of our local degenerates. I looked him in the eyes. This won't happen again on Copperhead Road. He sucked in his breath and departed. He knew enough. I tried to relax. I actually did. I walked the border path with the dogs and sat on the back patio, listening to the surf. I rocked while listening to the surf. I did not want to return to teach another course, but I did. I also taught the puppies how to be effective military guard dogs. I showed them how to guard, drop, brace, hold, disarm, and attack. Their parents observed and learned. The hardest part was teaching them to be quiet. Carla Jensen was one of my students. It was a tiny little thing. She stood out by attempting to be invisible. She had a clubfoot, long brown hair, and no chin or boobies to speak of. I could tell she wanted to participate in the class discussions, but she held back. This simply wouldn't do. I had a new project. I invited her home to use my library. I soon began quizzing her and pointing out various approaches. My small project soon blossomed. She argued with me more and more. The dogs accepted her. I quickly persuaded her to participate in our Thanksgiving feast. I fed her until she was about to pop. One of the puppies clung to her like a deer tick on a cozier. That was it. She was one of us. I tutored her. See Pearl and website automation. Her advisor never had a chance to point out her path. I never made a sexual gesture in her direction, but I did offer her a house key. She was the first in our growing family. She ran a profitable small business doing website design and maintenance using our DSL line. Anders was a young man I met in town who couldn't find a job worth his soul. I shrugged my shoulders and hired him as a general handyman, janitor, driver, and mechanic. When the dogs adored him and he grinned like a fool, I knew I'd done well. I purchased another bedroom set. Nicky was only a child, but he was alone on the street. I offered to shake his hand, which surprised him. After that, everything was smooth sailing. He loved the sound of the waves crashing on the beach, just like I did. I didn't care that he was only 11. I took my time and directed him in the correct direction. I purchased yet another bedroom set. I called my friendly neighborhood contractor and requested 3 additional bedrooms and bathrooms for the house. This trend did not show any signs of slowing. Jenny and Jenny arrived as a matching pair of redheads. The state orphanage system had screwed them over pretty badly, so I gave them a substitute, Rosa. When the feds arrived to take them away, I contacted the newspapers and had the children tell their stories. They had dates, names, and locations. I told the sheriff that if you didn't clean the house, I would. He disliked that. However, many children were relocated away from the local state orphanage and ended up living with me. They gagged at the high school. You shall have no other thoughts before me. Crap. But he graduated. I had them quote Samuel Clemens to the teachers. Everyone pitched in to help clean the place. They saw what a sorry mess I'd made of it. I looked into who owned the empty properties next to mine, with a preference for property away from the seashore, which was prohibitively expensive. I discovered 16 additional acres available. It was more than $500,000 in land. I took out a second loan and put $100,000 down. I had the fence line moved and posted. It now had an electric gate with digitally encoded keys similar to garage door openers, as well as a camera and alarm to monitor who was at the gate. The pictures were displayed on a screen in the kitchen. I consulted with an arborist to design my 20-acre forest near the road. We marked a stand of Japanese tree lilacs. A grove of sycamores could be found further along. A looping drive was lined with black walnut, sweet gum, and white oak trees. The large, rounded crest was to be covered in shagbark hickory. A large blue spruce grove was planned, along with a large Chinese juniper stand near the shore. Lines of Japanese barberry and rugova rose were planted to prevent anyone approaching the house from any direction other than the road, which served as the primary running path. The house was surrounded by Miss Kim lilac and Peking lilac. The soil behind the house was too shallow for large trees, so salt-tolerant shrubbery and grasses were planted. I hired the man to trim what needed to be trimmed, and to thoroughly treat the plantings with decomposed organic matter twice a year for the next 5 years, in order to train the shrubs and get all of the woody plantings established. A small grove of native apple trees was planted in a hollow well away from the seashore, while a small orchard of golden delicious apple trees thrived on a sunny slope. Everything except the apple trees was chosen for its high salt and wind tolerance. The kids thought I was crazy. However, I planned for outcomes 5 and 10 years down the road. With all of the thorny brush I planned to plant, the area would become an arboretum and a deer sanctuary in 20 years. No hunter in their right mind would attempt to walk the area. I paid off the first loan in the 3rd year and put the title in a bank. The children outgrew their video games. I purchased an 18-foot catboat, and we all learned to sail. I thought it was a lot of fun. We all traveled up the bay to Portland several times. Many restaurants, bars, and entertainment venues are located downtown, near the piers in Old Town. I heard him as we were walking towards the theater. "Hey, Sarge, do you have a minute?" I came to a halt and turned, expecting to see almost anything but what I did. An elderly man was sitting on a piece of cardboard, just inside the mouth of an alley. "Anything for the troop? You are aware of this." "Thank you, Sarge. I am out of luck. Out of options." "Sarge, I need a DOS. You appear to have a serious problem. Are you feeling stressed?" "No way. Just tired." "Fall into a troop." He managed to get to his feet, but I had to help him back to the boat. I set up my cot pad and some blankets in the garage for him. "This is TDY. Tomorrow, you will have an appointment with a doctor. And we're working on a long-term solution. You eat in our kitchen at 612 1800. I'll get you some extra clothes so that we can wash your kit. There is a bathroom and hot tub near the kitchen. Use them to remove the ground and dirt from your skin." He sat there, looking as if he had been smacked in the head with a 2x4. "Don't hurt the dogs. Team." He nodded and smiled. We had him fed and put away for the night. The others made no complaints. Despite the fact that we had to cut our night out short, I called my doctor and scheduled an appointment for the guy. I didn't even know his name. That's ridiculous. I was malnourished and shaky, so the need was there. I bought him combat fatigues, jeans, t-shirts, underwear, socks, and paratrooper boots. They have a zipper on the side for easy on-off on the loop, where we planned the black walnuts and white oak trees. I had a small prefabricated house, built on a 20 by 35-foot footprint. It cost a lot to have the facilities run to it, but we got her done. I added a large TV antenna on top so he could watch TV, as well as listen to the radio. We furnished it with decent appliances and furniture, just a few steps up from Motel 6 Modern, and fully stocked it with both white goods and food tours. I kept to myself for a while, probably out of boredom. We found him running with us every morning. He started eating with us on weekends, and I walked through the woods with him to get a sense of the terrain between the seashore and the growing woods. It was a pleasant place to live, and I began hanging out with Tori. One couldn't help but smile as I watched Tori whack Anders with a black willow wand whenever he made a mistake while woods walking. Soon, the gang let their curiosity get the best of him. They were getting whacked right alongside Anders. Soon Nina and Carla joined in the fun. I firmly believe in the Savage Arms Corporation. They sell well-made, low-cost firearms that aren't flashy but certainly do the job. I purchased a half-dozen 22 Magnum stainless steel bolt-action, all-weather rifles with iron sights, and no scopes for myself, as well as a Savage PHP 110 and 30.06, with an 8-power red field scope and sling. It's a police sniper's weapon. First, I taught them how to maintain their weapons, breathe properly, and keep an eye on the wind. I purchased a few 6-power red field scopes for their rifles, as well as a few spotting scopes, and distributed them in pairs. When it isn't life or death, learning how to use a ghillie suit is enjoyable, but the fire move is difficult to perform. No matter how you run it, you must move as quickly as possible while maintaining cover and looking for your next firing point. It's much easier to do in pairs of teams. It only makes sense to set up firing points, cover resupply points, and heights on your own turf. We also showed them how to set up firing lanes, intersecting fields of fire, withdrawal avenues, and immobilization using Myers brush piles, tangles, and pits filled with blackberry brambles and barberry. Who needs concertina wire? This was the summer play. It returned Tori to fighting trim, and I lost an additional 15 pounds. In the fall, I enrolled the kids in self-defense classes. I insisted they attend Krav Maga classes and join them. Their woodland walking lessons served them well. Their situational awareness lessons set them apart from many of their classmates. Despite the fact that they did all of the work themselves, I was pleased with the results. A few years later, Tori simply did not wake up one morning. His body couldn't take it anymore. The scars on his chest and back indicated that he had been through the meat grinder more than once. The kids were horrified at first, but after I explained that passing away in a clean, dry bunk was the best an old vet could hope for, they began to understand. Nonetheless, it separated us. The kids went to college, and I didn't hear much from them afterward. Carla moved away after the puppies died. Nina stayed to help me, but we didn't talk much. He died in a car accident. I spent my time walking in the woods and sitting on the back porch. I write a little when the spirit moves me. After about 20 years, listening to the waves allows for an easy acceptance of moving on. I discovered that there is a curse for those who pursue their heart's desires. It's like getting exactly what you ask for. I had bonded service. Send someone once a week to check on me, clean the house, and stock the refrigerator with ready-to-heat meals. A bank's trust department was hired to handle my bills and make sure my money didn't disappear into someone's pocket. It was too late in my life to find a spouse or companion. I've never been one to share my heart with anyone else. Not really. At this point, it would be too painful to attempt. Assisted living facilities seem like Athanasius centers to me. I've read or seen far too many science fiction stories to feel comfortable trusting anyone who has no real reason to listen to my wishes, let alone control my entire well-being. I had no interest in spending my remaining days as a drugged-out husk on some overcrowded wards, smelling of piss and shit. I would end my days contemplating the end of great men such as Archimedes, Plato, and Napoleon, and dare I mention Samuel Clemens? I suppose that someone will find me there on that porch, looking out over the waves one day, just as cold as those waves. Here's the next story. I'm 30 for him. Carrying around resentment for years while growing up. It was just my mother and me for a few difficult years after she divorced my father, when I was in my teens. My father eventually remarried, and I gained a stepbrother who never concealed his dislike for me. He always treated me as if I were an unwanted guest in his life, rolling his eyes at everything I said or snickering when I tried to be polite. At first, I dismissed it as typical step-sibling tension, and I tried not to take it personally. I eventually realized he and my father had one major thing in common. They saw me as a convenient source of cash. In my late 20s, I began making a decent living by working a variety of side jobs and investing in things I understood. Nobody gave me anything. I was not working in a fancy tech company or anything like that. I was hustling in a variety of ways, including taking multiple part-time jobs, buying and reselling items for a profit, and dabbling in small local ventures. I pinched pennies, saved aggressively, and eventually found myself doing well. But every time my father and stepbrother saw me, they'd hint or outright request a loan. At first, I didn't see the problem. I told myself that they were family. Why not, if I can help? But they never repay me on time. Actually, they barely paid me back at all. My father's main pitch was always some variation of "I'm working on a really big deal. I only need one more push." My stepbrother's approach was more like, "Hey, I'm good for it, and you've got enough anyway." Their words were often laced with guilt. Aren't trips meant for the whole family? Alternatively, remember yourself or your father for raising you. I try to be compassionate, but the more I offered, the more they took. I see them flaunting brand new items, going on expensive trips, and making excuses. When I asked about repayment, my mom tried to warn me. She'd say, "You can help them a little, but make sure to protect yourself." She was never on good terms with my dad. Obviously, they were divorced, but she still wanted me to avoid the drama. I was stubborn. I did not want to believe that my own father would exploit me. I convinced myself that once they got a break, they'd do right by me and pay off their debts. Then Thanksgiving came around. I was at my father's house with my mother, who had come as a sign of peace, because extended family had been invited. A few aunts, uncles, and cousins. The smell of turkey and mashed potatoes filled the air. Everything felt like a typical holiday atmosphere, but I could sense tension whenever my stepbrother glanced my way. He'd run out of money again for a project I never received. He always claimed that the details were top secret or something. He tried to corner me earlier that week and borrow a few $1,000s. I refused because he still owed me a chunk of change from the previous time. Furthermore, I knew he'd blow it right at the table. My father began making little digs about how fortunate I was to have money. He claimed I hadn't worked hard, as if it had just fallen into my lap. My stepbrother joined in, sneering like I'd never heard. A real struggle. They kept piling on. I attempted to change the topic of the conversation. When a cousin asked what I'd been working on recently, I began to discuss a small local venture in which I had invested. Before I could finish, my stepbrother interrupted me and said, "We don't need a lecture on how to be a big shot. We only keep you around for the money, anyway." He spoke with a smug grin. The entire table went dead silent. My father gave a half shrug and piled on. "That's about all you're good at. You would be able to share more of that money with the family." I felt my heart race and my jaw tighten, but I didn't panic. It was as if I had gone numb. I continued to eat in silence, finishing my plate, setting down my napkin, and leaving without saying anything. A few family members tried to convince me to stay, but I was done. I just walked out, got into my car, and drove home. I'm feeling a strange mix of hurt and anger in my chest. By the next morning, I had made my decision. I'd had enough of their attitude, insults, and their constant hands in my pockets. I contacted my lawyer, whom I had already been working with, to ensure that all of those loans were legally documented, and I instructed them to enforce the provisions that would freeze my father and stepbrother's assets if they defaulted on payments. Many people are unaware that I always set up legal agreements when lending them money. They signed off on everything, allowing me to attach conditions that would freeze their assets if they did not follow a repayment schedule. I was tired of waiting for them to keep their word. 2 days after Thanksgiving, my phone was inundated with calls and texts. My father's voice on voicemail. "What have you done with my accounts?" My stepbrothers texted me a variety of insults and begged me to unfreeze their money. It was an outpouring of rage and panic, and I won't lie. It felt like the first time I had ever experienced true justice. My mother called to express her concern that this was going to escalate. My paternal uncle, my father's brother, left me a lengthy voicemail about how I was tearing the family apart during the holiday season. I asked him where he had been all those times. My father and stepbrother belittled me. He became quiet. Then he said something about me taking a joke too seriously. I ended the call. I was no longer in the mood to be talked down to. My stepbrother flooded my messages with excuses. He claimed to be having fun one minute. Then I should have realized he was joking. The next minute, he was threatening to show up at my house if I didn't fix what I'd done. I saved all messages and informed my lawyer. We drafted a response, warning him that further harassment would result in legal action. That silenced him for a short while. But then he responded with a final text. "You are no longer alive for us." I shrugged it off. When they humiliated me for Thanksgiving, I felt as if they had declared me dead. A few days later, my father showed up at my doorstep. I opened the door so my neighbors wouldn't have to witness a loud argument on the porch. The moment he walked in, he began barking at me, asking if I'd lost my mind freezing his assets. He accused me of putting him down and claimed that I owed him for raising me. I pointed out that the signing agreement stated that I had the authority to freeze his assets if he defaulted, which he did. He tried to spin it by talking about how family members do this to one another. Despite the fact that he had been trashing me for years, he tried to avoid telling me I was only good for money. I gently reminded him that half the family had heard it that Thanksgiving. He tried to dismiss it as a harmless joke, but I told him I was tired of being the target of jokes. He blew up and threatened to ruin me. He claimed to have spread the word that I had scammed them. I told him that I had recorded or documented every text message, contract, and phone call. If he wanted a public showdown, I would gladly provide the evidence. He realized he couldn't intimidate me and stormed out, slamming the door so hard it nearly knocked a picture frame off the wall. I was shaking from adrenaline, but I also felt relieved. For once, I hadn't capitulated or apologized for something that wasn't my fault. After that, things got ugly. My father and stepbrother attempted to challenge the asset freeze in court, claiming they had never agreed to such terms. The judge took one look at the signed contracts and dismissed their claim. They claimed they had not been given enough time to pay me back. My lawyer presented the payment schedule, which had been ignored for months. They attempted to portray me as ruthless, but the paperwork did not lie. They also began losing it on social media. My stepbrother went on a rant, accusing me of deceiving the family and manipulating them into these phony agreements. Some of my distant relatives and his friends expressed sympathy for him, until I posted a simple message stating that I have all of the written agreements and proof that they borrowed the money willingly. If you want to see it, DM me. That effectively silenced him. Around this time, I discovered that both my father and stepbrother were looking for ways to maintain their current lifestyles. My stepbrother, in particular, despised the prospect of giving up the flashy car he had been flaunting all year. He attempted to refinance it, but each lender saw the asset freeze and refused. He eventually had to sell the car. Meanwhile, my father's house was on the line because he had refinanced it several times to fund various schemes and had no backup plan for repaying anything. One of the most awkward moments was when my paternal uncle suggested we have a family meeting at his house. He invited me, my father, my stepbrother, and a few other relatives who had been caught in the crossfire, hoping to persuade me to back down. I arrived with my lawyer, primarily because I knew they'd try to corner me if I was alone. My father and stepbrother were already present, furious. My father yelled at me as soon as I walked in, accusing me of destroying the family bond. My stepbrother kept staring at me, as if I had personally betrayed him, rather than the other way around. I basically told them that if they wanted their assets unfrozen, they should read the contracts they signed. They would have to repay what they owed. My lawyer reminded them that we had already offered a reasonable payment plan months ago, which they ignored while blowing money. Nonsense. My father claimed he only signed the agreements under duress, but the lawyer pointed out that he had notary stamps and written confirmations proving otherwise. My stepbrother then turned on my father, accusing him of dragging him into this. That resulted in a shouting match between the two of them, which ended with him storming away. My uncle sat there, shaking his head, realizing there was no simple solution. When that failed, my stepbrother attempted another sneaky move. He contacted one of my business partners, telling them I was involved in major lawsuits and implying I was untrustworthy. Fortunately, I had already discussed the situation with my partner. He forwarded me my stepbrother's emails. My lawyer sent him a cease and desist letter for defamation, warning him that if he continued, he would be sued for damages. That was the end of the stunt. According to a few extended family members, my father was constantly complaining to anyone who would listen that I had kicked him out for no apparent reason. When they asked what had happened, he dodged the question. Some people dug a little deeper and realized he was just upset that I wouldn't be his money machine anymore. A couple of my relatives kept bugging me to show mercy, especially since it was nearing the holidays. They told me to forgive and forget. I asked if they knew how many times I'd forgiven these two, and how many thousands of dollars I'd poured into their pockets. This usually ended the conversation. Things became even more complicated when my father attempted to open a new bank account to avoid the freeze due to the legal notices in place. The bank flagged it and turned him down. According to what I heard, he made a scene in the lobby, yelling at the manager and claiming they were conspiring against him. Security escorted him out. Meanwhile, the first continued to receive reports from my lawyer about the slow but steady process of liquidating their assets. Because they had so much debt and so little actual equity, it was a slow process. But they were making progress. Every time something was sold or seized, I received a memo explaining that a portion of the proceeds went toward the debt they owed me. I'll admit that there were times when I felt guilty, especially as my father's anger turned to desperation. But then I would remember how he and my stepbrother had treated me for years. They treated me like a doormat and a personal ATM, dumping their problems on me and mocking me when I objected. They never once acknowledged the assistance I provided them. They never showed the slightest sign of genuine respect or gratitude. At Thanksgiving, they crossed the line by openly stating in front of everyone that I was only good for money. Why should I continue to help people who see me as nothing more than a piggy bank? My father called me one last time around a month after Thanksgiving. His voice seemed tired. He informed me that he was experiencing health problems and accused me of causing him distress. He stated that if his condition worsened, it would be on my conscience. He felt manipulative, but for a brief moment, he tugged at my heartstrings. He is still my father, after all. But then I remembered the smirking face at the dinner table. Years of guilt trips and nasty texts, and I realized it was just another attempt to get me to give in. I told him, "You brought this on yourself. You cannot blame me for enforcing what you signed." He began to say something else, but I hung up. Eventually, the court ruled completely in my favor. My father and stepbrother's claims that I coerced them, or that they didn't understand. The paperwork were shot down. They're deeply in debt. Their assets are frozen until they can produce the money they owe. And they're both in financial distress. My father had to relocate to a smaller place. My stepbrother stayed with a friend for a while. I've heard he's been looking for a job that pays enough to support his lifestyle. But he hasn't found one yet. Some relatives still believe I went too far. I see things differently. After years of abuse, I finally felt like I could stand up for myself. They always acted as if I owed them everything simply because we shared blood. That bridge was burned. They told me outright that I was only worth the money I had in my pocket. They didn't mind humiliating me in front of the entire family. If I had not put my foot down, it would not have stopped. I'm not going to pretend that this hasn't been emotionally exhausting. It is never easy to cut off family members, even if they are toxic. But I'm also sleeping better at night, because I'm no longer worried about how they're going to squeeze me next. I can concentrate on my own work and the people who genuinely respect me. I do not regret freezing their accounts or enforcing the contracts. It may appear harsh, but it was either that or continue allowing them to walk all over me. The kicker is that if they had shown even a hint of kindness or remorse, I might have taken a gentler approach. However, they didn't. They doubled down, insulted me, and attempted to sabotage me. They only realized the gravity of the situation when it started affecting their bank accounts and possessions. Now they're stuck, and I'm not going to help them. Sometimes I wonder what my stepbrother is up to these days. Is he still cursing me out whenever he looks at his empty bank account? Probably. And what about my father? Well, he'll always see himself as the ultimate authority, capable of doing no wrong. So I doubt he will ever admit fault. But that's no longer my concern. I'm only posting this to get something off my chest. I've been carrying the weight of their entitlement for far too long, and I'm finally done. For anyone reading who feels guilty about cutting off toxic family members, I understand how difficult it is. But sometimes it's the only way to truly be free. They once said I was only good for my money, and I made certain that money was the one that pulled the rug out from under them when they couldn't keep their word. That is the current reality they must face. No more simple handouts. No more unconditional bailouts. Ultimately, I feel relieved. The drama has been intense, but at least I know I have stood up for myself. They bet on me being a pushover forever. It turns out they made a bad bet. I'm out of that cycle. I am not looking back, and I have no regrets. I am finally done being their personal cash cow. Let them face the consequences. I am moving on with my life.